Ladies and gentlemen, like all goalkeepers, we'd like to encourage you to use your voice to make a difference. This is Use Your Voice. Come on, everybody. Is a daughter or a son? How long? Not long. Come on. Can we look down the barrel of a gun? Your voice. Sing it again. It's your voice. Your choice. Your choice. Make some noise. Yeah. Your voice, try and understand it. Make a noise and make it clear. Whoa. Whoa. Sit in silence. We're not gonna live in fear. Whoa,
Well, welcome back to the afternoon of Goalkeepers 2018. I hope you enjoyed the morning. This session is really a special session celebrating the legacy of a leader who's an icon for the fight against poverty, inequality, and injustice, and was a champion for young people every day of his life. It's been 100 years since he was born and 5 years since he died. But his legacy seems more urgent than ever before. I was only 9 years old when Mandela was sent to Robben Island. As a boy, I learned about him in school. I remember seeing reports about anti-apartheid movements on the evening news. But I got to know him personally when I started coming to Africa regularly for our work at the foundation. AIDS was one of the first issues our foundation worked on. And Mandela was both an advisor and an inspiration. One thing we talked a lot about was the stigma around AIDS. So I remember very clearly when his own son died of AIDS in 2005. Rather than stay silent about the cause of his son's death, Mandela announced it publicly because he knew that stopping the disease required breaking down the walls of fear and shame and denial that surrounded it. Even near the end of his life, Mandela was thinking about the future. He believed that people could make the future better than the past, and he wanted to be sure that people would continue these efforts after he was gone. It's a very appropriate message because that's exactly what we're here to do today, to think about how to make the future better than the past. We're putting a spotlight on the Sustainable Development Goals. The progress we've made is astounding, and it's in large part because of the people who Mandela called his heroes, the activists and change agents who, in his words, have made the world their theater of operations. And many of them are in this room. So today, let's celebrate the man, continue his mission, and strive to achieve the goals. Thank you.
Okay, and here we go.
100 years ago, on 18th July, a baby boy was born in the small village of Mvezo in South Africa. He was given the name Rolihlahla, It means troublemaker. That's what they call a major case of nominative determinism.
Known to some by his clan name, Madiba, and others by his school name, Nelson, this child with many names grew up to become one of the most seminal voices in the fight for justice that the world has ever seen. From prisoner to president, he was a statesman and father figure who commanded as much affection as he did respect.
We are honoring Nelson Mandela today, not just for his extraordinary life, but also for laying the foundations of what it is to be a goalkeeper. He provides a template, as well as a mandate, for us to keep working towards greater justice and equality for everyone, especially those leading the toughest lives.
I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunity. It is an idea for which I hope to live for and to see realized. But my Lord, if it needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die.
Amandla! Amandla! I Afrika! Aibuye! I greet you all in the name of peace, democracy, and freedom for all. I stand here before you not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people.
Let there be justice for all. Let there be peace for all. Let there be work, bread, water, and salt for all. Let each know that for each, the body, the mind, and the soul have been freed to fulfill themselves. The time for the healing of the wounds has come. The moment to preach the chasms that divide us has come.
I say to all those leaders, do not look the other way. Do not hesitate. Sometimes it falls upon a generation to be great. You can be that great generation. Of course, the task will not be easy. But not to do this would be a crime against humanity. As long as poverty, injustice, and gross inequality persist in our world, none of us can truly rest.
Mandela understood that problems do not exist in isolation. The cycle of poverty cannot be broken without education. The right to education must include girls. Girls getting jobs will help stabilize fragile economies. Economies cannot thrive where communities are crushed by lack of clean water and sanitation. Clean water and sanitation are under huge threat from climate change. Climate change will hit the poor first and hit them the hardest. In essence, everything the global goals are now fighting for.
Mandela brought many of these critical issues to the world's attention during his lifetime. He was perhaps most famous for being the steel backbone of the anti-apartheid movement. As he told the court that would go on and sentence him to life imprisonment, it was a cause he was prepared to die for. And with his freedom 27 years later came the promise of freedom for all. Those who had suffered under this tyranny became equal under law. As South Africa's first black president, he formed a multiracial government that embodied to blacks and whites alike the dawn of a new democracy.
But he also did so many other things. He created 46664, an organization named after his prison number, which campaigned to raise awareness around HIV and AIDS, having lost his own son to the disease. He talked about how gender inequality made women particularly vulnerable, and that for every woman infected by HIV, we destroy a generation.
He founded the Elders, an independent group of world leaders whose work continues to highlight issues like climate change and how it is as integral to the eradication of poverty as it is to the future of the planet as a whole.
He talked of how education was the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world, and described the South African government's progress in supplying clean water to its people as amongst the most important achievements of democracy in our country.
And he was a relentless warrior for the world's poor, throwing the full weight of his support behind the Make Poverty History campaign in 2005. He reminded the world that extreme poverty is unnatural, that while poverty persists, there is no true freedom. He urged us to pressure governments to address debt, aid, and trade for the world's poorest countries, to have the courage to be that great generation.
What Mandela would always return to was his belief in the dignity of all human beings, that issues like poverty, HIV, inequality, lack of education, poor sanitation, weak infrastructure, and corruption demeaned the right of everyone on the planet to live a healthy, safe, and prosperous life. The global goals have been created in the spirit of this same belief. Here's what we as goalkeepers can learn from Nelson Mandela.
During the years of Mandela's incarceration, he was determined that in the face of overwhelming obstacles, it would not and could not break him. It was his total conviction in his principles that kept him going day after day, year after year.
His whole life exemplifies the notion that progress isn't always a straightforward, upward trajectory, that it can be erratic, that it may falter and face huge setbacks. It can test you to your limits. Being a goalkeeper is also about understanding that change can sometimes be incremental, almost indecipherable. Bit by bit, day by day, you keep digging until one day you realize how far you've come. And then you keep digging some more.
Mandela was relentlessly hopeful, marvelously hopeful, magically, gloriously, exponentially optimistic. It is people like this who just will not accept the imbalance of a world where a child dies of an entirely preventable disease like malaria simply because of arbitrary geographical circumstances. We need people like this who keep reminding us that it doesn't have to be this way if we are willing to do something about it.
He taught us to keep looking ahead, to believe in the power of youth. As he once said, young people are capable, when aroused, of bringing down the towers of oppression and raising the banners of freedom. That's why it's so important for goalkeepers to mentor the young. That's why it's important for many goalkeepers to actually be young.
Nobody knew what to expect on the day of Nelson Mandela's release. He had gone into prison, a tenacious and defiant 44-year-old, seemingly ready to take whatever was coming in the name of his beliefs. But nearly 3 decades later, who would emerge in his place? A fragile man in his early 70s, out of touch, exhausted by the great personal cost to his life? Or a prophet, mysterious and removed, having somehow cheated time to become immortal and unreal?
What the world saw that day was to become one of the most enduring images of the 20th century. A warm, dignified figure, impeccably dressed, who walked tall, fist raised in solidarity with the huge crowds who had come to witness this extraordinary event. Although he was now famous beyond comprehension, he was also gentler, wiser, with a moral authority no one could question. A charismatic, formidable, yet personable politician who was ready to listen, to engage, and still, after all these years, to pick up where he had left off. Who never looked back with bitterness, but only forward with enthusiasm.
While to some he took on an almost mythical status, Nelson Mandela was always careful to point out that he was just a man like anyone else, with as many faults and weaknesses as the rest of us. As goalkeepers here today, it doesn't hurt to be reminded of that. But it is also true to say that if a man who was incarcerated for almost 1/3 of his life can find the will to never give up, What excuse do the rest of us have?
His life is not history. It is not something we should just look back on and say, that was amazing. He doesn't represent a moment in time that has now passed. He is now. He is tomorrow. He is momentum, courage, grit, belief. The one who was told it couldn't be done again and again and again, and then did it anyway. He was a man who changed things.
Our greatest mark of respect to him is to ask ourselves, what can we now do to tackle the challenges the world faces today? And then get on with the business of doing it. In the words of Nelson Mandela, the original goalkeeper, it always seems impossible until it's done.
Hello. Hello. Hi, everyone. How are you guys doing today? Yes, it is I. I'm back. Everyone well rested? You guys getting? I know you just start the day quite early today, but everyone's feeling good. It's been an inspirational day. Yes? Excellent. Excellent. It's really great to be a part of this. I mean, anytime you celebrate Nelson Mandela, especially as a young South African, I actually remember when 1994, when the ANC won the elections. I was very excited. The mood was great, but I was very young, so to me it was the same excitement as like winning a football match. It was my parents' team won that day. That's what it felt like. But it's when I come and I stand before you guys and I get these opportunities that I really, truly am able to take in the efforts of Nelson Mandela and all those who stood beside him. And wasn't that amazing? Can we please give a round of applause to Mojan, Adesola, and Maps Maponyane. 3 amazing performers. But the reason I'm back here is to talk to one of my heroes, Her Excellency Graça Machel. To whom I will be referring from now on as Mama, because as an African I cannot refer to her in her first name. She was the Mozambican First Minister for Education at the age of 29. And she is an SDG advocate and a real champion for young people through the Graça Machel Trust. Of course, she was also married to a nice guy, Nelson Mandela. I'm now going to ask her a few questions that are on top of my mind. Can we please have Her Excellency here?
Hi, ladies.
Yeah, Mum.
You want me to sit there?
Yes, please. Now, Utata Madiba was, he talked about how, I was tempted to do his voice, but I won't. The quote was, I'm not a messiah, but an ordinary man who had become a leader because of extraordinary circumstances. What is it that stopped him giving up? What do you think it is that thing that kept him a goalkeeper? And what would you say is that thing that the youth now can use in their endeavors?
I would say it was principled conviction. Madiba was always very convinced of what he wanted to achieve. And it was always based in principle. It was not emotional, it was not temporary, it was something he was prepared to go to the end to achieve. And that's why he belongs to that generation of South Africans who said, freedom in our lifetime. And they delivered freedom in their lifetime. What does it require? Clarity and what they were fighting for. It required discipline to keep focused. It required perseverance. It required something which I believe is extremely important, that for them and for him personally, it has never been about him. It was always about his people. And because of that, whatever could be the circumstances, he will keep focused and will not deviate from that. And Madiba was also a very humble person. Those who managed to be close to him will recognize that he was not full of himself. He was really, when he says he's an ordinary person, and his journey has been ordinary. Those who elevated him to the status of being a hero, being icon, it's us, the people. But whenever you will be close to him, you will shake hands with a human being. He will smile to you as a human being. He was never what we decided to bestow upon him, because we needed, a huge reference to look up to. But him, in his way of saying, he would say, I'm a country boy. And he was in some ways.
Yes.
He kept his life as simple as the young man who grew up in Kunu.
So I guess what I can take from that is a really strong sense of purpose, that built-in principle.
Built-in principle. That's very important.
And right now, as millennials, this is quite a young forum that we have here, luckily, with us. But our generation, the millennials, have been criticized as being entitled. And I think seeing what the people have been doing now, I think it's a bit of an unfair blanketing statement. But what do you think maybe we're lacking in terms of making whatever we're doing bigger? How do we escalate the issues as young people, especially as Africans? How do we get from small projects to really making global change?
I don't subscribe to the idea that young people are entitled, this sense of entitlement. I think freedom allows, it's for that, our generation, for young people to feel this, it's their time,
yes.
It's their space, it's their life, so it's fine. But what you are asking is what it will take to make the big transformation of society.
Yes, especially after we saw today with Bill's presentation of the future of Africa, which can seem quite dismal. So we can, as Africans, you and I, we can go, our efforts need to double up. This next 12 years is more important than ever. How do we as Africans make sure that the next 12 years is global?
I think if we had to learn from the generation of Madiba is, perhaps I would give the quote of saying, if we take the 17 goals, there is apartheid still in each one of them to achieve. So young people, in your own time, with your own challenges, take it. It's hunger. How many millions who are still hungry? How many millions are still with lack of education, lack of what any one of the goals? It is still a kind of apartheid between those who have access and opportunity and those who do not have. So to young people, I would say, choose your own focus. If you want to focus in education, you simply have to do it right in a perseverant way, because then, you have the 600 million we were told here this morning to bring into the system, for instance, So your question is, how do they do it? If you want to learn from the lessons of the past, is that you need to build movements. For apartheid in South Africa, it was a movement, broad movement, which was within South Africa itself to build on the millions of people. But across the globe, there's no one single country in this globe which did not have cells of supporting the fight against apartheid. So perhaps that's what you have to do. In every single country, get those young people who are going to focus,
yes.
on we overcome hunger, and to say we have to eliminate hunger in our lifetime. And others will say we need to make sure that everyone on this globe, girls and boys, they are going to have education. We are going to focus on health. In every single one of these goals we are talking about, just choose where you want to put your mind and your heart and your energy aligned, and then build a movement. Because you are not going to do it in small groups only. It has to be a broad kind of coalitions, because then that's when the transformation is going to happen. And this is the lessons, I think, from how it seemed impossible actually to bring down apartheid, right? How did they manage to do it? It was precisely because they built those movements. And this is what I would say to young people, particularly from Africa and Asia, because these are the two continents where we are still hugely challenged. Build those movements. You can be brilliant in your organization. You can be effective, I mean, to cover 500 people, 1,000 people, but what you need is to build the energy of all those people at Grassroots and to make them own the fight against all these little apartheids which are somewhere there. That's one. The other thing which I believe you have a huge opportunity, it was clearly, I mean, discussed this morning, is that you have opportunities which are much bigger than those days. And you can actually build those movements using technology. You can communicate in question of seconds. You reach out to millions of people. You have to use that. So you don't need the long time which that generation had to go through. And your time also, in framework, it's very clear. Yes. You have 12 years. And these 12 years, you are brilliant, you can strategize, you have the means which are available, you can do it. And importantly, I go back, you have to be convinced that you can do it, and you will.
That is great.
Yeah.
Well, we have less than 12 minutes left. At this point, I'd like to invite an audience member to ask Mama a question, because I could jabber on with her all day. Anyone with a question for Mama Graça? The gentleman in the front here. Do you have a mic for him? Thank you. I feel like Oprah.
So, thank you for your inspiring words. What I wanted to ask was, given just the iconic nature of Mandela and the complexity of the man, there's something very connecting about the way that you were talking about him as an ordinary person. And if you were so willing, I'd love to just hear maybe a couple additional thoughts of things that we might not already know about him, but that you might be willing to share to sort of better connect us with the mission and your mission as well.
Melinda put this issue quite rightly this morning, to say, you know, at the age of his 20s, Mandela, like you, he did not dream or even to think of himself becoming the kind of icon we are talking about. He was an ordinary young man who simply, like you, embraced one cause. And this room is full of young people who have made the choices already about their causes. So connect with them in that sense. What I suggest exactly is that ordinary men and women, when they have that big commitment to a certain purpose, the Mandelas, the Albertina Sisulus, the Wangaris, I'm talking of those I know better in my part of the world, but I could be talking of others. They are inside each one of you. All those we claim to be heroes today, they grew exactly like you. In other terms, I want to say, you know, the heroes of these next 100 years now, those who are going to make history of overcoming poverty, illiteracy, disease, etc., are in this room, and they are in many other places where young people are embracing this. And make no mistake, you are exactly like what they started when they started, and it's up to you, but you have to be clear again to connect with you. You don't have to leave this room and think, I'm great, I'm going to make it. No, you are convinced, but have the humility, because that is also one thing. The humility of engaging other people, making sure that the movement grows and grows and grows, because you can communicate from the level where anyone can feel connected with you. So I think also, as we praise you as the goalkeepers, but I also want to suggest that be humble and allow the communities you serve to be the one who elevates you. As I said, Madiba didn't elevate himself. He was elevated by people. People will elevate you recognizing what you do, what you achieve, and how you respond to the deepest aspirations. Then they will say, Nadia, the young lady who was with us here last night, these are the women who are going to make history from this generation.
Thank you. While we're talking about young people who overcome great odds, I noticed a South African there in the front, someone who makes me feel very lazy. Eddie Ndopu, my friend, you are apparently going to space while I'm struggling to get a visa to London?
That's right, Loiso. I am joining forces with the United Nations on a groundbreaking campaign to address the UN General Assembly from the edge of the planet as the first wheelchair user in space. And I'm doing this because I think about the words of Madiba when he said, it always seems impossible until it's done. And I want to put the words disability and possibility in the same sentence. And I'm doing so. I'm doing so because, like many disabled people across the planet, I am a living manifestation of possibility. I was diagnosed at the age of 2 with spinal muscular atrophy, and doctors predicted that I wouldn't live beyond the age of 5, and I'll be celebrating my 28th birthday in a few weeks.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I hear you know Mama too.
Yes,
for her?
and it feels like a full circle moment because this time last year we met and a lot of progress has happened on my campaign. But I'd like to ask you, Mom, in the spirit of achieving the impossible, what is the one dream that you have, the seemingly impossible dream that you would like to make possible?
That's a big one.
Well, we only have 3 minutes, so another question.
Another question. But you asked me also to support another campaign which you didn't talk about. You know, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights doesn't make explicitly, the rights of people living with disability. And Eddie spoke to me and said, Mom, I want you to help with this. And I am working on this, actually, because I happen to be part of a group which is looking very deeply, actually, to 70 years back, but 70 years from now, what it is which the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has to integrate, which were not very clear as challenges of human family those days. So we're working on that. Even in the going to space, you know what I tried to do, and we are almost there. And for me, you are really one of most inspiring young men I have met, young people I have met. And one day you asked him, why don't you give up? Do you ever think of giving up? I said, with people like you, how can I have the luxury of giving up? How can I have the luxury?
all very, very inspiring. I mean, the people we're surrounded by today, and I see today we have Kweku Madiba here today, Mandela today, and good friend of Nelson's, Miss Naomi Campbell, so we're all in good company. Today would have been his 100th birthday this year.
It's this year, and we are still having lots of activities to celebrate him, and I want to thank Bill and Melinda for creating this space specifically to celebrate him. But as I would like to leave, it's, celebrating is to get inspiration, is to emulate. And I'm sure each one of you, if you say, I celebrate the life of Nelson Mandela, you choose your own way of living Mandela inside you and transforming your own purposes into a reality as he managed to do. That's the celebration. It's in each one of us.
Thank you, Mama. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll leave this interview stuff to you guys. Honestly, it's I don't know how you guys face such wonderful people and with such modesty and like professionalism.
Okay, well, that was you last night.
Oh no, I had a script. So much easier with a script.
Thank you so much. You did an incredible job.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's easy when the people are so positive and inspiring, and everyone's here with a good heart.
Not the usual comedy crowd, is it?
No, comedy crowds it's just a room of assholes. It really is just judgmental people, and you guys are beyond judgment, so this is great. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. One more round of applause, please. Right, this whole afternoon is going to be about how exactly to be a goalkeeper. We've heard about the ultimate goalkeeper, Nelson Mandela, and we've just heard from some current inspiring political leaders about how they're driving progress, and now it's our turn to ask ourselves what we need to do.
We've all seen those YouTube videos, how to bake a cake, how to put up a shelf, how to contour. This is the goalkeeper's version of that. So we brought together a group of you to come up with our own list of how-tos. A lot of you are in the room right now, and here they are. And here is what they came up with. This screen is so cool, by the way, right? We'll see in just a moment here some sticky notes that are going to kind of show us, there it is, lots of the different types of things that we want to kind of figure out exactly how to tackle here. We've dealt with a few of them already, and we're going to keep trying to work through this list, but we're pretty sure there's still a lot missing. So we've got speakers, lots of chances for questions, and time for discussion.
But before all that, we first want to introduce you to someone who knows how to get stuff done in tough circumstances. And after you hear from him, we'll get straight into some questions for him. So please join me in welcoming the President of the International Rescue Committee, David Miliband.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Well, I have to say, tough gig to follow Mandela and Graça Machel. That is really, I don't think I've ever had to do anything quite like that before. I want to take as my goalkeeper a really special person who also can't be here. I've only met her once, but she has a big impact on me, and I feel she is watching over me at the moment. Because last year in northeast Nigeria, outside Maiduguri, I went to one of the healing classrooms, which is an educational facility that we run for displaced people. Many of you will know that Boko Haram, the terrorist group, has driven millions of people out of their homes in northeast Nigeria. This is one of the more typical types of civil conflict that pervades the world today. And I went to this grass clearing where our teachers were working with some young people, and there was a little girl, Amina Musa, who was 11 years old, and she was working on a picture, and I want to show you the picture that she was working on. Can you call it up, do you think? And as you can see, it's a beautiful picture of a Nigerian woman. You can see the pastel shades, you can see the headdress, you can see the earrings. And I said to the teacher, tell me about Amina Musa. Has she always been good at this kind of art? And they said, she arrived here 11 weeks ago. She's lost the rest of her family. And all she could draw 11 weeks ago were soldiers and dead bodies. And 11 weeks on, what she was able to do then, I think, is an inspiration about the resilience of the human spirit, about the creativity of the human spirit, and about the optimism that we need to share with people who are literally fighting for their lives around the world today. And I want to pick out 3 lessons that I think we should learn from Amina Musa, and that I hope we can take forward and that you can take forward. The first is to be really honest with ourselves about the nature of the challenge that we face in tackling extreme poverty today. Because 4 out of 5 countries where there is conflict, where there's fragility, they're off track for meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. In the countries where conflict is a daily occurrence, in countries where there are displaced people and refugees, 43% of the world's extreme poor are now in those fragile and conflict states. The Brookings Institution says it will be 60% by 2030 on current trends. So we've got to be honest with ourselves as we seek to build on the extraordinary achievement of the Millennium Development Goals, on getting halfway there, that the tools we created to strengthen health systems, to tackle extreme poverty in stable places, we're going to have to find new tools in conflict-ridden places. And that leads to my second lesson. The second lesson is we're going to have to create new ways of targeting poverty. And I want to take the example of education. Half of the world's displaced people today, and remember there are 25 million refugees, 40 million internally displaced, half of them are children under the age of 18. And how much of the global humanitarian budget goes on education? 2%. We are literally creating the extreme poor of the future in the way that we run or fail to run and fail to prioritize in the humanitarian system today. I'm incredibly proud that with the Sesame Workshop, we won the world's largest ever intervention in an early childhood development intervention in a humanitarian setting last year. The MacArthur Prize worth $100 million. But it's actually shaming that $100 million is the largest ever early childhood development intervention in a humanitarian setting. $26 billion a year is spent on humanitarian aid. But the interesting thing about that intervention, for 0 to 8-year-olds in the Middle East, we're going to reach 1.4 million children in their homes, in their communities, in their childcare centers, and 7.9 million children digitally, because we're working with Sesame Workshop, we're going to do a new TV series. The interesting thing is, the evidence shows that you can take a child who's literally been traumatized by war, who you can measure in their brain the toxic stress as the flood of hormones comes to the front of the brain. You can literally measure how the right kind of social and environmental and emotional intervention can turn that tide and set that child up in a healthy way for life. But it means thinking about a different kind of education. It's not building schools, it's not even teaching literacy and numeracy. Before these children can access literacy and numeracy, you need to rebuild their social, their emotional resilience. And the third thing I think we should take from Amina Musa is as follows. We need you, the goalkeepers, we need you to be brave in calling out people in power. I was in Yemen last week for 3 days. Yemen is the world's largest humanitarian crisis today. 83% of the population, 83% of 28 million people are dependent on humanitarian aid and are in extreme poverty. 50% of the population have no access to clean drinking water. 8 million people are dependent on the World Food Programme literally to survive. 3.5 million children are not just fighting off malnutrition, they're fighting off famine. Now the truth is we can build all sorts of new and better systems for delivering humanitarian aid. Just to give you an example, at the moment, if you get an acutely malnourished child, there's a different protocol for dealing with severe acute malnutrition than there is for dealing with moderate acute malnutrition. Doesn't make sense. We've got a combined protocol that brings the two together so that you can do a bit more prevention, not just intervene when it's too late. But here's the thing, we can do that till we're blue in the face. But if we can't stop the wars, then we're not going to be able to reverse the tide of poverty that is going across conflict and fragile states. And the truth about Yemen is that it needs a ceasefire to allow humanitarian aid to enter, to allow commercial traffic to flow, and to allow a genuine peace process to get going. So I would plead with you, and I was told, look, you've got to inspire this group. The truth is, you inspire me rather than me inspire you. You inspire me through your ambition, through your optimism, through your sense of can-do. But what I would say to you is think about the following. In a year's time, world leaders are going to gather to audit progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. We've got to take responsibility to ask them the hard questions. We've got to demand that they prioritize the growing group of extreme poor who are in the fragile and conflict states. We've got to, secondly, have the accountability so that we properly measure how many of those people are dropping into extreme poverty. Because the danger at the moment is we're not actually measuring this group of displaced people. In too many countries, the Sustainable Development Goals don't measure, don't count the number of refugees. And the third thing we've got to do is be really brave about our willingness to call out those in power so that they use power for good, not for ill. And the truth about extreme poverty today is that it's man-made, not natural. That's why when people say it's a tragedy that there are 83% of the people in Yemen in extreme poverty, that's wrong. It's an indictment, not a tragedy. It's an indictment because it's a man-made problem. It's a human-made problem. It's often the men, actually. It's a man-made problem. It's a man-made problem, but it's got to be a human-made solution. I think that's what I was trying to say. If we stick to that idea that we've got to prioritize, that we've got to hold them accountable, and that we've got to be brave, then I think we can really make progress. Thank you very much indeed.
David, thank you so much for sharing that wealth of your professional experience with such personal conviction. And of course, for that nod to gender equality. But I want to circle back to something you said at the beginning about us needing to be realistic and honest about the challenge. And this is a good moment to open it up, I think, for our goalkeepers here, to be realistic about the challenges that they face. And if you've got a question for David, this is a great time. There's a hand right here in the front. If we can get a mic there, just tell us who you are and go for it with your question.
Hi, I'm Eric Mitchell from Canada, and I work with One Young World. And one of the things that we've noticed to be a severe issue for young people to get involved is simply a lack of resources. Melinda Gates said it before, we need investment, and investment is cash, money. I think that it's a good time to talk that the One Young World group has $500,000 available for young people in this room and around the world who have ideas that they want to put into action to achieve these goals. So I think that more programs like that are critical to get these goals done in the 12 years that we have to do them.
Okay. David.
Nice. I mean, the only thing I'd say is remember what Graça Machel said here 15 minutes ago. Don't just have your bespoke project and your own community. Connect up, network, build coalitions. Because I know from my own sector, from the humanitarian aid sector, there are thousands of brilliant little programs. The real challenge is to scale them and connect them so that they have big impact. And so I love what you're doing, but make sure you're connecting, not just enclosing.
There's, let's go to this side of the room first. There's a hand here, and we'll come back to the middle again. So just tell us who you are in the yellow sweater.
Hi there. My name is Dr. Suvila Madikane. I'm from South Africa.
I'm sorry, would you mind standing up?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
There you go.
I'm Dr. Suvila Madikane. I'm from South Africa, and but currently in New York, I'm doing a master's in public health at NYU. I love that you touched on funding for education, because even currently I have a similar problem myself in terms of higher education funding, because of the exchange rate between developing countries and countries like the USA and the UK and Europe. For example, I have an outstanding amount of $9,500 and I can't register at school. But to put it in context, in South African rands, that's 150,000 rands because of the exchange rate differences. And Goal 4 speaks about access to quality education. And I just wanted to find out in terms of, I mean, in South Africa, we had a campaign called #free higher education because there was an issue with accessing higher quality education to improve the lives of young people in terms of research as well. How can we then, as young people, access free quality higher education, but specifically for countries like the USA and in the UK, etc.?
Well, it's always dangerous to take questions because you never, there's always be one that haven't got the faintest idea how to answer. But I have learned this in America. In America, they have this great thing where you say, that's a great question. And in America, that is code for, I haven't got the foggiest idea how to answer it. Look, the truth is, I'm going to give you a serious answer which you might not like. Half of the refugees in the world, who are children, have no access to primary education. 3/4 of the refugees in the world have no access to secondary education. I'm focused on people who can't send their kids to school because they can't afford the pencils and the paper and the shoes. And I apologize, but honestly, I don't think there is an answer to how do you get free higher education in countries that restrict free higher education to people who are citizens of that country, other than the scholarships that some universities and some foundations support. But I was inspired by this. I was in Ethiopia earlier this year, and one of the things for refugees, these were refugees from South Sudan, one of the things for refugees is that they get their education interrupted. And I know this won't answer your point, but the Canadian government has said that anyone who is qualified, that they're reserving 15 places for anyone who's qualified to have a free higher education in Canada if they are a refugee from a war-torn state. I'm focused on more things like that, so I really hope that doesn't seem cruel. I want you to pass your masters in public health. I want you to really succeed. What I would say to you is, it's the best investment you'll ever make. And you'll go back to South Africa and then make a huge difference to your own country.
All right, we've got room for one more question. This gentleman here in the green jacket. Please stand up and...
Three blokes you've chosen to ask questions. That's a bit...
Thank you.
I think that you'll have to... you'll ask your question, but pass it on to the lady along the... so ask your question, but then pass it on.
Thank you so much. My name is Ali Kaviri, and I'm a Women Deliver Young Leader. I come from Uganda. Nancy, hi.
Hello. Country.
Yes. So my actually question, I come from a country which hosts more than 1.5 million refugees. For me, and especially listening to you as an expert within the humanitarian sector, there's so much advocacy that we do, especially from a civil society perspective, in terms of mobilizing resources to take care of there's so many victims of the refugees. But then the question I really want to put to you is in regard to the issue around governance. Across Africa, there are issues which are not right, especially when it comes to question of leadership, question of governance. And I would just make this, ask you to make this, actually, what would you, if you met, let's say, the president of South Sudan, what would you really say? Because most of the time, they're fighting. It's the people that are suffering. What kind of message would you give to such people who are not listening to the people that they lead? Thank you so much.
No problem. Yeah, and pass it along to the lady along, and then I'll answer the two together.
Hi, I'm Nadia Musaji. I'm also from South Africa, and my company develops women and girls for the engineering and technology industries. We work in 17 countries. But my question is really about being brave and calling out leaders on war. So the war in Yemen, the Libya, literally the Middle East. We're in a country that invaded 2 sovereign nations in the Middle East with a lot of public outcry, the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan. And so as activists, even though we're brave and we try and call out leadership, the issues in Yemen is really about, there's been a big public outcry around Yemen, but politicians don't listen, right? So how is it that beyond being brave, we can do something more proactive to actually stop the war and therefore reduce poverty?
Look, that's really, let me start with the second question because it's really important. I'm sorry to say this, but I don't agree. I don't think there has been a great public outcry about Yemen. One of the reasons I went is I wanted to be able to give personal testimony that people had to wake up to what was going on there. People don't know that it's 28 million people who are living in that country, 23 million in humanitarian need. They don't know that 67% of the armaments that have been dropped are American. Now, there's interesting things happening. 48 American senators, 17 Republicans, voted against the last arms shipment to Saudi Arabia. That's unprecedented in this country. So I'm afraid my answer on Yemen is we've got to shout louder, and we've got to say two things. One, this is the world's largest humanitarian crisis. Human-made, man-made. But secondly, Yemen is not a situation where humanitarian crisis is the price of a winning war strategy. It's not. It's absolute stalemate. 18,000 bombing raids have been run in Yemen over the last 3.5 years, and the warring parties are in the same position that they were in 3 years ago. Actually, the only people who are stronger are Al-Qaeda and ISIS. In fact, the war is notionally being continued to push back the Iranians. They're in a stronger position than they were 5 years ago. And so I think we've got to call out those two messages because it's a misbegotten, woe-begotten strategy that's being pursued there on humanitarian grounds, but also on geopolitical grounds. Now, just nice to be able to end on a more positive note, because Uganda is a really, when people say to me, well, name me a country that's doing the right thing by refugees, and I say, look, I went to northern Uganda last year at the height of the South Sudan crisis. 1 million South Sudanese came into Uganda in the space of a year. And I met the deputy chairman of the district council up there. So he's dealing with the local politics among local Ugandan citizens there. And I said, how's the politics on this refugee flow? Is it causing problems for you? And he said, I tell you what, we're not building a wall. And so that said to me that all politics is global these days, or all sound bites are global. And he said, look, in South Sudan, they sheltered us when we needed them, and we're going to shelter them when they need us. And that means, in Uganda, full right to work, full right to use public services, so your kids can go into school and you can use the health system, full freedom of movement around the country, no more refugee camps that are funeral homes for dreams. In fact, people are allowed to have their own plots of land, they're allowed to travel to the major cities, they're allowed to contribute to the society. And so we should be saying thank you to Uganda, we should be supporting Uganda macroeconomically, because the truth is that if you listen to the American media or some American politicians, if you listen to Europeans, they'll tell you the American refugee crisis or the European refugee crisis, rubbish. 2% of the world's refugees are in America, 6% are in Europe. 8% are in Europe. 88% of the world's refugees are in poor and developing countries like Uganda, where when I was there, the average income per head was $1,000 per person per year. And that country is saying, hang on, the people who are fleeing, A, deserve our help, and B, they can contribute to our society. And I just want to finish with this, because this is really, in a way, it's a counterpart to the Amina Musa story, and it speaks to the young man, the doctor up there. So we run water and sanitation programs, health programs, education programs, and we also run employment programs. And one of them is to give business loans to women. And I went to Kampala, and where there are a lot of refugees from South Sudan, and I met a woman who we'd given a business loan to, and she would set up a little banana ripening business. A tiny shack she bought. She bought the bananas, they ripen, then she sells them for a markup. And she told me this incredibly moving story. She said, look, I saved up with this business to help my daughter get through school. And that's why I gave you the example earlier about the pencils and the shoes. She said, I paid for my daughter to have paper and pencils and shoes to go to school. She said, would you like to meet my daughter? I said, yeah, I'd love to meet your daughter. She introduced me to this young woman. I said, what are you doing? She says, well, I've qualified from high school and I'm now at Kampala University. And I said, well, what are you studying? She said, I'm studying public health, like you. And I said, and what do you want to do when you've finished your degree? She said, you know what? I'm going to go back to South Sudan. I'm going to help rebuild my own country. So it's an investment in your own regional future. So yes, thank you to Uganda for setting an example, but hang on, we need other countries to follow. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. This is one of the fantastic things about goalkeepers. It's a reminder of all the reasons we have to be optimistic. And I just have to say, I remember going to the Bidi Bidi refugee camp in Uganda when all these refugees from South Sudan were really flooding in, and farmers there were giving their land to refugees who were coming across the border. And we interviewed some of them and asked them, why are you doing this? And their answer was, why wouldn't we? These are our brothers. And I think we need to hear more of that. We need to hear more that this kind of thing is happening. Savannah, I'll let you take on the next bit.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. And don't worry, I promise there are more moments, opportunities for you guys to ask questions, interact, so we'll keep going with that. But who's up for a little more inspiration first? So I'm pleased next to welcome two campaigners who epitomize what today is all about, which is investing in young people. And I know we've talked about it a lot, but we're going to do it a little bit more. Firstly, Nobel Peace Prize winner and activist Kailash Satyarthi. Kailash's experience spans from the grassroots to the global. He's freed over 85,000 children from slavery. He's organized one of the largest social movements for children's rights and founded the Global Campaign for Education. Joining Kailash is Graça Dukureh. Graça is the founder of Safe Hands for Girls. Her tireless work in campaigning to end FGM led directly to a ban of the practice in the Gambia. She's now a UN Women Goodwill Ambassador. Here to talk to you about how they've done it, please welcome to the stage Graça and Kailash. Come on over, guys. I'm so excited to talk. So I'm first just going to start out with a question, and then we're going to open it up to you guys. So same question, we'll keep it quick. I want them to be able to learn from you guys just kind of a little bit of insight, maybe not something that you're always asked to kind of reflect on, but when you're maybe at the beginning stages of wanting to be an advocate for something, of being an activist, and you start kind of gaining support around you, that's one thing. And then what you guys both have, I use the word in your intro, is a movement. So can you guys talk to me about how that tipping point is created and kind of reflect on recognizing when that was in your own paths?
Want to start? Okay. So I don't know that any of you sitting here is 11-year-old. No, I know. But I'm sure that once you were 11-year-old. Isn't? Yeah. So when I was 11-year-old, I saw that some of my friends were forced to leave school because their parents could not afford textbooks and fees. That made me very sad, rather angry. Then I had an idea. I spoke to a friend of mine, and on that day, when the school results were announced and normally most of the children go to the next grade, I thought their textbooks will become useless. So with the help of a friend of mine, we rented a four-wheel cart, which is normally used by the vendors, vegetable vendors, etc. So we decided, my friend was pulling the cart, I was standing on that and chanting, "My dear sisters and brothers, congratulations, you have scored good marks and now you have gone to next grade. Dear uncles, aunts, congratulations, your children have gone to next grade." So people started coming and watching from the roofs, from the balconies, that what kind of crazy boy is it? It is. But I did not stop. I kept on chanting, "Congratulations," so everybody was happy. And then, when they came, I said that think for those children who left schools because they don't have textbooks. And what about your textbooks? They will go waste. They said, yes. So I said, why don't you put these books in my cart, and I'm going to take them to those children. I was just 11-year-old, so I don't know what to do, but even then, people kept on pouring books. And I tell you that within 4 hours, we were able to collect almost 2,500 books. And every time a book was put on my cart, I felt more confident. I felt more courageous. My mind was becoming more clear. And the biggest problem that how to take these books, because my parents would be very angry that suddenly their child became a beggar on the street. But I was happy about it. So I kept my books somewhere with a friend of mine. And then some teachers who saw me begging books on the streets, they said, brilliant idea. So they said, yes, we wanted to join this. And then within a week, we were able to collect 10,000 books. 10,000 books. And my biggest problem, second biggest problem was that how to segregate these books, because I knew about 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, but the people put the books of university courses like trigonometry, geometry, this matry, that matry, philosophy. I didn't know what philosophy was, or statistics. So with the help of some of my teachers and headmasters, I had an idea that why can't we create a book bank so that the needy children could be identified by the teachers, and they will take the guarantee that the children borrow the books for 1 session and they have to return at the end of the session when they pass that grade. So that began the book bank. Every child in my small town called Vidisha in Madhya Pradesh was able to get the books, and nobody was abandoned from the class because of lack of books. And I tell you one more sentence, that after my Nobel Prize, when I went to my hometown, it's a small town, so whole township was on the streets. It was impossible to just walk or breathe. Hundreds of thousands of people, 200,000 people were there. So suddenly I saw that there were 2 old-looking people crying, and they said, Kailash, Kailash. So I stopped my open car and called them close to me and hugged them. I asked, who are you? Oh, you don't know Kailash, who we are? I am retired, he said, one person, as a headmaster. Others said that I am also retired from another government job. But we have left schooling because we could not afford syllabus books, and now we are so happy that because of your efforts, your book bank, we could continue our study and finish our study, and now got retired from the government jobs. And I started crying, I tell you. When the Nobel Peace Prize was announced, I was the first Indian-born Indian to get the Peace Prize. Everybody was crying and happy and joy, but it did not bring tear in my eyes. I said, okay, good, very good. But there at that time, when these people said, oh, because of you, Kailash, we have become teachers and headmasters because of your books, I started crying. I felt, and that became a movement. I could not stop there. Of course, my fight was always against child slavery and child labor. I will tell if you ask a question later on. So I'm inviting you to ask a question later on. But anyway, you're going to speak. But then I could not stop, and I spoke to a number of organizations like Global Teachers Confederations, Education International, Action Aid, Oxfam International, Plan International, World Vision, you name all these, Save the Children, and my own organization, Global March Against Child Labor, to build a strong movement that is known as Global Campaign for Education. Global Campaign for Education emerged as human history's single largest coalition of civil society organizations and the largest ever movement which has compelled the governments and the international community to bring education in the forefront. 15, 20 years ago, it was not the issue, 20 years ago. Education was not on the forefront in political agenda. But now everybody is talking of education, girls' education, and I'm so happy. But when I started fighting to create such a coalition with all the organizations, it was not an easy job. And that has become the worldwide movement of civil society organizations.
And
in new language, we can call them goalkeepers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a movement is exactly what it is. I want to get some questions in there, but do you have something quickly that we can talk about your sort of movement tipping point so we can get everybody in on this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to answer the question that you had about when did I realize that I was at a tipping point, I think for me, the work that I do is personal. I don't do this work for anyone. I do it for my people and I do it for my community. When did I realize that I needed to do what I do? For decades, there's been campaigns against female genital mutilation, but they were mainly driven by the West. Personally, I felt like women like me needed to lead that. Right now, when we talk about the FGM movement, we are leading thousands of women around the world who have either experienced this practice or are from the communities where FGM and child marriage happen. And I think it's very, very important that we allow people from impacted communities to lead solutions. We are so used to importing solutions into communities, and we see these people as victims and that white savior mentality that has to end if we are serious about change in the world. So for me, the tipping point was leading that change myself and leading it for my community, leading it for my sisters, and having amazing women that are very, very, especially young women, that are very, very supportive of the work that I do. I mean, I'm very, very honored to be in front of all of you. And one person that I think is very, very instrumental in the work that I do and is very, very supportive is Dr. Ala Murabit, who's in the audience, and thank you for being here.
Amazing. Well, thank you. I love that you said something tangible. Let's open it up. Questions, anyone? See one hand down here. And if you could stand up and say your name, and then we're going to go over right there next.
Hello, my name is Adrian, and I work in tech. I started a global tech community, Global South Tech, and we've been talking about movements and the youth, and I think technology has and is having a huge impact in governments. So what would be your advice? You know, technology is creating movements on the fly, and young people are just embedding they're in their smartphones all the time. But a lot of times governments have a huge influence on how information gets spread. So what would be your advice for advocates, activists, in terms of dealing with government, technology companies, and their communities? Like what the role technology will play in regard to these 3 points?
Thank you. I answer that and then let Kailash go. But as a young person, I've used technology a lot in my work. I started out with a Change.org petition where I wanted President Obama to look into the issue of female genital mutilation in the US. More than 220,000 people signed my petition, and President Obama ordered the CDC to conduct the study. And I think I continue to use all social media platforms to try to get my message out. But I think social media also has a huge responsibility. Not all governments and not all people have access to social media. In the communities that I work in and in the government, the villages that I work in, a lot of women don't even have cell phones, not to talk about internet. And internet is not something that's cheaply available. So I think companies that are working in technology, people like you and I have access, but not everyone does. So the first thing is providing access so that everyone can have access to that information and be able to use it in a way where we can build bigger movements that are more inclusive. Because right now, I don't know if that's as inclusive as we want it to be.
Fantastic. Right here, I have two right next to each other. I think this might be our last question or two, since you guys are together. So you guys will be able to network with everyone after, so don't worry. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Sohani. I'm from India. I run an organization called Saral Designs in menstrual hygiene. My question is for you, Kailash sir, that we have seen that puberty is almost like a tipping point where girls drop out of school, and which makes them more vulnerable to the kind of work that you're trying to support. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on how menstrual hygiene management can probably help women be in school, girls be in school, and avoid early child marriage.
A few things. For example, the awareness about all these things is the beginning. So that requires a more child-friendly education, where the teachers, where the parents, mothers, friends, sisters can speak about protection of girls. Age-appropriate sex education is also equally important, which is unfortunately not in most countries available because of the social taboo and so on. Thirdly, the girls themselves should speak out. No one else can become their savior. Your savior is you, your hero is you, your leader is you. So see the leader inside you as a strong girl, especially coming from India. So that is important. Then I tell you, I'll give you one example that we work, of course, I work across 140, 150 countries on the issues of child slavery, child labor, trafficking, education, etc. But in India, we worked across 600 villages, what we call child-friendly villages. Child-friendly villages were the villages where rampant child marriages, child trafficking, child labor, the girls were not in schools, or dropout of girls in schools was very obvious in first or second grade. So we decided 4 things should happen. One is no child abuse, including sexual abuse. Children should be given basic education, including about the sexuality, the positive sexuality, among the small circles, not in schools because schools don't do it. Secondly, all children should be enrolled in schools, irrespective of caste or community or gender. Thirdly, the children of the village form a children's parliament by way of democratic election, what we call panchayat, as you might be knowing. And fourthly, the village community, which is an elected body and has money and power, has to recognize the children's parliament, and they should sit together and work together, where the children can speak truth to power, children can share their issues, and the adults have to listen. The people in power have to listen. And then act immediately, because no force in the world is stronger than the power of youth, the purity of youth. So that has been the thing. So now we have 600 child-friendly villages where these things are happening, and we have spreaded it in Nepal, in Uganda, and some other countries as the model. So the whole process is led by the youth, by the children of the village, and others follow them. So these things are automatically solved when the youth take the lead role and sit on the driving seat. And that is possible. So no child marriages, no child trafficking, no child health issues because the girls go to doctors and speak to them, or the girls go and knock the door of the village head and tell that we want a lady doctor, we want a lady teacher, because we cannot share our issues with the male doctor. So these things had happened, and thousands of the girls and boys were able to be benefited out of it.
Thank you, that was incredible. Okay, we do have to wrap. I'll let you do a short and sweet question.
I'll try. I'm Srilekha. I'm also from India. I'm a gender rights activist. I have a question for both of you. So, we are saying that, like, as goalkeepers, we have to always constantly mentor the young. So, but also, like, working in the grassroots, we find, like, so much of backlash all the time. So, who have actually been, like, mentoring you, or who has been the mentors whom you have looked up to in your work?
Okay. So I mentioned Dr. Alam Rabit earlier. She's a young person like me. She's my age. And having that support, because the type of work that we do can be very lonely. And a lot of times people have this perception that young women don't support one another. That hasn't been my case. I've been supported by other young women who are facing similar challenges that I do. When I have a question, or when it gets very, very lonely, or when I just can't figure my way out, these are people that I can count on. Working on the issue of female genital mutilation, you have to remember my father is an imam, and I come from a very, very conservative community. And I'm not your typical Muslim girl that's a daughter of an imam. I'm not representative of that because of maybe I don't fully wear the veil and different things like that. And I face a lot of challenges. I face a lot of backlash. But having that network of young women supporting me is what gets me through the day.
I have to wrap us up, but they're both going to be available to talk, and we can hear afterwards in the atrium. They'll actually both be around seriously for networking, for more question asking. So thank you so much, you guys. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
And I'm bringing Nancy back out, and Nancy is going to keep checking off some of these how-tos for us.
Thank you, Savannah. So we've heard a lot of stories today, and we've talked a lot about data. I'm here with Mona Chalabi. We can sit down. I had a woo, so somebody knows her. She's a data journalist for The Guardian who translates spreadsheets into funny, sometimes shocking, irreverent, and effective illustrations. So if this session has been about practical, tangible ways of being a goalkeeper, this is really the perfect example of that. So by now, I'll just be a contortionist for a second. Some of you will have read the data report, and we'll get to that in a moment. But first, Mona, tell us a little bit about your work. How do you take masses of numbers that people may not really care about and turn them into stories that engage people?
Well, hopefully that's the goal. I made a couple of slides as well. So yeah, I kind of take a series of numbers, and they can be in all kinds of different places, right? Sometimes it's an academic report. That's a big part of what I do, because I feel like a lot of academic studies don't really enter the public sphere. It can be government papers, spreadsheets, anything. And then I either turn them into written stories or illustrations. And I thought that I would talk about the illustrations a little bit today. So if you think about most charts that you look at, they're quite sterile. The next slide is hopefully going to show that. They communicate information quite effectively, but they never really connect it with the subject matter. So if you were to remove the labels on one of those charts, then it could be about anything at all. And I think that actually people who make those kind of charts do that deliberately, is to kind of convey this scientific accuracy. But actually, most of the data that's collected is imprecise, right? Humans were involved in every single stage of the gathering with all of their biases. So the way that I visualize data is a little bit different. I kind of put together a load of different ones here. I feel like it's slightly blurred because so many of them are obscene. They took out some of the worst ones. But the idea is that when you glance at those visualizations, you immediately get a sense of the subject matter, right? So if it's going to be about hangover rates, then let's show a guy vomiting. If it's going to be about the New York City skyline, then let's have a series of bars. And that's done for a number of reasons. It's so that hopefully the data is more memorable, and very often these are important statistics that people need to remember. It's to create a bit of joy around data visualization as well, and as I mentioned, it's to communicate some of the imprecision. The fact that these are hand-drawn reminds people that data is imperfect.
Do you have an example of this process? Maybe not an obscene one, but...
I don't think the next one's too obscene, but it is about male circumcision rates. And this didn't take too long to make, which is really, really great in a newsroom environment. You can very quickly kind of pull these together. Not that there was any breaking news about male circumcision rates that day, but in theory. And the thing that I really like about these is the conversation that happens around them. So if you're publishing like an opinion piece, as you know, below the line, right, commenters can have very, very heated back and forth conversations. And that still happens when I post my illustrations, but I feel like it's a slightly different kind of conversation. So people will be asking, well, why do the rates differ so much globally? And then people ask, well, are there any health benefits of circumcision, or is that overstated? Does it help prevent STIs? And then public health workers will comment on that and be able to engage in a conversation that's about the data as opposed to the feelings around the data necessarily.
That's fascinating. Now, I know Goalkeepers gave you a challenge.
They did.
To actually turn some of the information in this report into something like that. How did that go?
So we have the slide, which is like the initial chart that I was given to visualize, which is not this one. This is another illustration that I did, which was, part of what I do as well is that it shows you that countries that people think of as not necessarily being quote-unquote developed are actually really, really progressive in ways that the West might not be. So I felt like this visualization did a good job of that. There's another one. Sorry, I don't have a clicker thing, which is about the legalization of same-sex marriage and how it varied in different countries. And I think we have one more before we get to the report stuff. Yeah, this is about tampon taxes in different parts of the world. very unfair. Anyway, so the next slide should hopefully show the illustrations. This was the illustration that was given, which is in the report on one of the pages that you guys have. And I think it's a fantastic piece of data visualization. It communicates the information very effectively, right? Quite clear. But as I mentioned, I don't think this really says anything about poverty. You don't feel anything when you look at this, and I think you should feel something about some of the data that you're looking at, right? It communicates injustice. So I had a really, really long back and forth with people at the people here about how exactly to visualize it. This is the first draft that I came up with. The next slide. Oh no, sorry, this was the data that I was given. This is not the first illustration I came up with. This is the data that I was given. And then this was the first, like, really, really rough draft that I did. And the idea was that I would say something about poverty, and we were talking about perhaps having a water level and showing people that are at different levels in the future, right? And I thought about it loads, and I think it's clear in that it shows you different possible scenarios, right? Best case scenario, worst case scenario, and if we stay on track. But I also felt like this imagery of drowning was maybe too emotive, and I didn't want to kind of overhype. I don't know, I didn't want to be too dramatic about it. And so this next slide is hopefully my first draft of the illustration. And I want to be really, really transparent. I think this is a terrible piece of data visualization. Like, part of the reason why I'm showing this here is to show how difficult this is and how most of my illustrations will have 10, maybe 20 drafts. And what I'm constantly doing is asking for feedback from people who don't work in my sector at all. Not journalists, not data visualizers, not anyone. Just people who would, in theory, be consuming the information. I think it's interesting to talk about why I think this is bad, right? So what I tried to do was to use 37% as the starting point. That's what poverty rates are like at the moment. And to show you that in a worst case scenario, we still stay very, very close to 37% poverty rates. And in a best case scenario, we reduce it. The problem with this is that, I'm trying to communicate too much. That's one of the biggest problems with most data visualizations, right? I'm trying to communicate time, I'm trying to communicate different scenarios, and I'm trying to use this whole metaphor of roads. But also, it doesn't work with people's, like, basic instincts. People tend to assume that more of something is a good thing. And in this case, the lines getting shorter is a good thing. Less is more in this. Right. So it's too much of a twist, yeah. But I'd be very, very curious to hear what people here think about how I could have done it better.
And we're going to get to that. I think it's wonderful that you've been so honest about the fact that this is actually really difficult and complicated and doesn't always work the way you hope. But there's probably lots of people here who do use data and are trying to communicate things about their work. Are there any experiences that any of you would like to share, or perhaps you'd like to feed back on something Mona has said? This is a great time for it. Okay, we've got a hand here in the front. If we can just get a microphone there. Right here in the front, there's a lady in black. Thank you. If you could just tell us your name and go ahead with your question or comment.
Hi, mine's more of a comment. My name is Mina Metatiri. I represent a company called Vital Strategies. We're based in New York. The work that we do, we work with governments, in particular in how to use the data that they have to go beyond just report writing or research publications into policy. And so we do a series of trainings around policy brief development. And one component of our training is around data visualization. And I'm looking at some of the examples you've given. I'm like, that's great, but that would not necessarily work for a policy brief in order to show information visually. So I like the fact that you state that it's...
Sorry, may I ask why? Why you say it wouldn't work?
Because oftentimes, in the countries that I work in, people are very used to the precision and seeing the exact numbers, what is that exactly saying, and not necessarily the story behind the data. Like with the circumcision example, it's excellent because it shows like, oh, there's variation. However, in the context that I work in, which is public health and epidemiologists and scientists and whatnot, they would look at them like, yeah, but what's the rate? I can't see what the number is. So that's why it wouldn't necessarily translate. And when you're trying to create a brief to actually hone in on a problem and then to state the impact and what the burdens are, it tends to fall more around, again, precision as opposed to conveying a general story. So I love the fact that you say that it's not a one-stop thing in terms of trying to get the best visualization, because oftentimes with these participants that we have, they find one thing and say, okay, now that's it. And I'm like, not quite. So this sense of that it's an iterative process, even in just data visualization, I think is very important. And this is so awesome. I wish this is like recorded so I could like play it to students. Like, see, it's not easy.
Thank you very much. But Mona, is there a point there about this is not for every audience?
Well, I would say there's things that you can take away from this and integrate into the reports, right? So if people feel this real obsession about precision, which I think is often overstated because even government data is imprecise very often, you could still annotate this with numbers, right, if that's what they want. And the other thing that I would say is that actually I feel like the obsession with rates has created a lot of public distrust in statistics, right? So a lot of people feel alienated by math, they feel alienated by statistics, and they feel distrustful of both government reports and of journalism. And so a big part of what I try to do is to constantly disaggregate, right? So rather than just saying the unemployment rate is this, let me show you what the unemployment rate is for your gender. Let me show you what the employment rate is where you live in the country or for your age group. And then people feel less distrustful because it matches up a little bit closer to their personal experience.
Yeah. Great. We've got another question this side of the room. And then we'll come to you at the back. We'll take one and then two and then answer them at once. Yes, go ahead.
Hi there, thanks very much. My name's Rosanna and I'm a Member of Parliament in the UK. I'm a big fan. And I actually say, I love what you do. And rather than say it doesn't work for everyone, why don't we say it's a refreshing opportunity to change the way people look at data? Because as a politician and previously working as a doctor full-time, I'm always presented with graphs that are really boring. It takes a long time to assimilate the information, and if they could be presented in a refreshing and vibrant, energetic way, it would also get more young people interested in getting into the alternative careers that they don't think are even possible for them. So keep doing what you're doing, it's brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just quickly respond? Just to say, I'm really, really fascinated in the fact that your background is in medicine, because I feel like that's one of the parts where data visualization needs to be changed most urgently. When you get a piece of medicine, the medical packaging shouldn't just have a long list of side effects. It should say something to you about the possible risks of each of those, and specifically for who you are. We all know that like most medicines are tested on men, they're tested on white people overwhelmingly, so people need to have a better understanding of risks before they consume medicine, and data visualization could go a long way in that respect.
Wonderful. We've got time for just one more, I'm afraid, but Mona will be around later in the atrium. You can grab her and ask her a question directly. But let's take one more from the back there.
Hi, I'm Rumi. I'm working in public health. I'm from Pakistan. A part of my comments have been addressed over there and there. So yes, for academicians, we need very gray and white bar charts and line charts. So what you're doing is, and I deal with mostly policymakers and parliamentarians, so they do not understand anything funny or even remotely humane, and a lot of colors. So I remember we had this public health conference and we displayed all the SDGs boxes, and they said, where did these colors come from? Why can't they just be black and gray and blue? And they can all be different shades of blue. So these are the actual colors. No, but we have to have them in blue or whatever. So my question to you is, when you are doing all of this and all this type of art work, the audience that you have in your mind is youth, right? Or you are looking at it for everyone?
Actually, my audience is the people who are in the chart more than anything else. So my background before I went into journalism was working for the International Organization for Migration. And part of the reason why I left the NGO sector was because we were writing reports about the situation of Iraqi refugees and IDPs. And those refugees and IDPs never read our reports. And that to me was a huge problem, because then that meant that they weren't able to say, you've gotten it wrong, you've misunderstood us, this chart is wrong. And if you don't have that feedback, if you have that feedback system, you're just going to continue to make mistakes. So I want people to be able to comment underneath my chart and say, you've misunderstood, and then I become better at what I do.
I feel hopeful because what you're doing for health, it could be something new and different. It could be something that we could do. Because in education, people have started understanding, they're showing girls and boy figurines and, different levels. So in health, that could be something new. Thank you. It was beautiful seeing your work.
Thank you. Mona, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much, though, for sharing so much of your work.
Yep.
Savannah will be right back, and we're just going to go through a few more of these goals. We want to get you talking. Like we said earlier, almost any of you could have been on this stage and interviewed today because this room is just full of amazing people from all professions.
Totally. So this part is actually really you guys just raising your hands. We are obviously not the people to answer the question. We're the people here to sort of be the traffic cops and make sure it works. So this is about you sharing your own experiences of how you've done something, asking questions. Some of our speakers are in the audience, so we can kind of go back to them if you want a little bit, but go for it. Do I have anybody that wants to ask a question from earlier or has anything of their own to share?
Yes, we've got loads. We can start. Let's start over there, and then we'll work our way. Just reflections on the day. Any comments or questions you might have?
Yeah, mine's a question. It's actually for Jaha right there in the corner. Jaha, something that I related to that you said was that we do need to start pushing for local leadership and local ideas and ensuring that, movements are being led from the ground, from the people that are with the communities that we're focusing on. And one thing that I was thinking about that with my own organization, which focuses on supporting former child brides and sort of pursuing their either education path, career path, or entrepreneurial path, was that how do you navigate, especially when you're sort of someone who is in a position of asking in terms of funding, and you have to work with international donors that have their own agenda and their own mission? How do you sort of balance that conversation where you negotiate with them to sort of meet their needs and also get the deal done, but then in the same pursuit stay true to sort of your local mission and ensure that you are not sort of let's say, bringing in an agenda that may be harmful to something that is communal and traditional or whatever is most comfortable with the people that are affected by the challenge?
You can hear me, yeah. So the question about funding, especially for young Africans, gets me a bit emotional because I remember about 4 weeks ago, there was a donor that asked whether we can be trusted because we're young and we're African. And I remember one of my staff saw the email and shared it with me. And then I started crying because I thought that was disrespectful with everything that we've accomplished at such a young age. I'm 28. I was able to get FGM banned in my country. I was able to change laws here in the United States. At my age, with everything that we've accomplished, the West still questions whether we can be trusted simply because of our skin and simply because everyone believes that millennials are shit and that we are too naive and yes. But I'm not good at negotiating when it comes to asking for funding. A lot of times I'm not donor driven. I don't do my work for donors. If you believe in what we do and the methods that we use, you support us. One of the things that my staff and volunteer continue to remind me is, we did this work when we didn't have tables. We did this work when we didn't have anything. We sat on the floor to try to get members of our community to listen to us. So the funding is good, but I don't think we should be negotiating. The big international NGOs in the West don't negotiate. They spend a lot of their money paying for office space in New York or in London. But yet we're back home working with our people, but they still question our credibility. They still question our authenticity. So I think at this point, it shouldn't be about negotiating with donors. Because if they're serious about development, they need to rethink how they do business.
Thank you. And that was one of the big issues, wasn't it? Raising money.
Yes.
Do we have any other questions?
I see a hand in the middle here. Sorry.
My name is William Otuk. I'm from Tanzania. I'm one of the Women Deliver Young Leaders. Mine is actually not a question, but a challenge that I can pose to a lot of people in here. This conference, this event has been dedicated for young people. And I can see a lot of us in here, and since morning I've been hearing a lot about what is expected from young people, what can young people, we young people can do, and we've seen a lot of examples from other young people. But one thing I've actually not listened to anyone speaking is about capacity building the capacity of young people. So to me, youth engagement is about partnership, equal partnership between young people and adults and other people, other players in the room. But how do you go to a battle with a person who is not even like in the same space, in the same capacity as yours? I think investment in building the capacity of young people, young youth-led organizations, youth networks and coalitions that are being built in the community is very important. And that conversation has been very given a lot of focus in this conference. So I would like anybody who's maybe working on building the capacity of young people, youth-led organization, say something or just continue the conversation from there. Thank you.
Okay, is this a response to, yeah, that we've got a response to that from the back there.
I mean, I absolutely agree with the two comments that have just been made. I think the way the aid community works is kind of, it's a little bit, I'm a doctor, it's a little bit like medicine. It keeps a secret code that kind of keeps people out from understanding what's being said. There's a language that you have to understand to even be able to understand your medical results, so doctors kind of hold that key. And in some ways, I think the aid community works in the same way, that you have to understand how to unlock the funding. And I'm just thinking today we receive a contract for some funding. It's 65 pages long, and we have to respond in 2 days, and I don't know how to read that contract and sign that. And I'm in a very privileged position with lots of years of education. So we'll hear a lot of people talking about youth participation and youth engagement, and I've met some incredible young people in the room today doing incredible work who are trying to get funding to launch their ideas. And I'm thinking how hard it is for our organization, who works purely supporting youth and building capacity and bringing their voices into development and health, to be able to even navigate that space. So if we're not making the access easier to get funding, make proposal writing easier and building that capacity, then we're still locking young people out. So I absolutely agree. I think we need to make it more accessible to youth on the ground. And I welcome what you're saying about the funding that's available and the grants that are being made available for young people, because we need to make it more open, we need to make it more easy to access, and we need to bring young people into that by helping them build the skills to write proposals, read contracts, all of these things that you have to navigate to be able to do this really important work and make these ideas shine. So I think we need more of that, and I'd love to talk to you later about some of how you can work with us at Y-Labs. So.
Look at that. Fantastic.
Does anyone else have sort of, I see a hand, so we can start moving a mic over here, but have kind of like a crazy idea that they need help with? That we can kind of go, is that what this is?
No. No, I don't have a crazy idea.
Where's the mic? Who's talking? Oh, like
Sorry.
who's talking? No, that's
Yeah,
okay.
I don't have a crazy idea, but I guess my thoughts are around similar to what you've just said, but around leadership. I think my main takeaway from this morning in terms of what got me thinking was, as young people, we're expected to, carry on the mantle of whatever we're addressing in terms of the SDGs in the future. However, I don't believe that leadership is inherently just going to be transferred in terms of good leadership, because you have leadership that's not good, but it's still leadership, and then you have a leadership that is good. So where in the conversation is it that we talk about leadership from, and I'm speaking specifically about political leadership and governance, where is the conversation happening in terms of mentoring young people in terms of how to be in government, how to be effective political leaders? Because right now I think it's the expectation that, yes, we're going to move forward in terms of politics, but nobody's really talking about, well, how are we going to do that effectively? I feel like I'm getting tongue-tied at this point.
Well, perhaps we can have a few ideas about the hows. Some of you have done some of these things. There's a hand over there. We'd like to hear how you did it. If you've got ideas for how it could be done, we'd like to hear those as well.
My name is Rachel Jones, and I'm a freelance writer. I'm based currently in Charlotte, North Carolina, but I have a powerful testimony about mentoring and the impact and what it can mean, because at this forum, Well, I should say 10 years ago, the Gates Foundation, through the Knight, a grant to the Knight Foundation and ICFJ, sent me to Kenya to work with young journalists around covering health issues. And a couple of hours ago, I just reconnected with one of those young journalists that I worked with, John Muchangi, who is now the science editor at the Star newspaper in Kenya. And I'm emotional because the work and the sort of interaction and support and nurturance of young journalists fulfilled me as much as it may have fulfilled them. And then, so I feel as though karmically it's been paid forward, because after spending 10 years working with young journalists, I was able to travel to Somaliland this summer to interview and meet Edna Adan Ismail for a story that I'm producing for National Geographic in January. So I want to stress to everyone in this room, if you have the opportunity to mentor and support a young person, to nurture whatever dream and vision that they might have, it can rebound to you in just tremendously fulfilling ways.
And thank you for mentioning Edna, because yes, she's actually coming up in just a little bit.
Yes, that was quite handy.
In response to the comments or questions by two young people about the youth engagement and youth leadership, youth capacity building, let me share in a minute our new campaign, what I call 100 million for 100 million. In 1998, when the world had no international law against child slavery, child trafficking, we organized a long march across 103 countries, which covered 80,000 kilometers distance, and 15 million people joined in it. When it reached in Geneva in ILO General Assembly, it has resulted in the international law known as ILO Convention on Worst Forms of Child Labor. We did a similar activity using social media, of course. 32 million people joined with us in the social media campaign to demand their leaders and international community to spend more on education in early 2000. And that was helpful. There was 1 billion overseas development aid allocated for education in 2000. That has gone to fourfold in 2010. And the number of out-of-school children has gone down from 130 million to 60 million in primary age group. Finally, trusting on the power of youth, we have launched this campaign called 100 million for 100 million. 100 million young people are victims of violence, poverty. This is also a kind of violence. Inequality, another kind of violence. Slavery, trafficking, denial of education, denial of health care. 50 million children are on move looking for a safer place to live, refugee crisis victims, and so on. 100 million. On the other hand, when I see and listen to these young people, my belief becoming more and more stronger that the youth are change. Youth are champions. And while working across 140, 50 countries, I learned that if somebody, some group is able to make sustainable change in the world, it could not be only politicians or businesses. If youth do not put their energy and power and vigor, that is not going to happen. So 100 million young people should become the change makers, the leaders, spokespersons, champions for the cause of 100 million children and young people who are bought and sold like animals today. 100 million are those who are victims of all these kind of things, enslaved. Millions of them are enslaved. So this campaign has been launched in 30 countries by now, and we have seen the results in Sweden, where the young people and the students in schools, colleges, universities pressurize their governments to spend more money in education.
And that's a very strong
example.
So
100 million young people are the leaders. Do you want to be one of those 100 million to change the world?
Yes, we do.
You do?
Yes, we do.
Then raise your hands if you really wanted to be one of those 100 million change makers for the lives of 100 million left out children in the world.
Oh, thank you. We need to go to a hand that has been raised for a while. Just here, yes, there was an eager hand. This will have to be our last, I'm afraid.
Okay, so there's an observation from me throughout the day. So my name is Daniel from Ghana. I run a youth skills employment organization in Accra. So centers on skills training for young people. So one of the things I've noticed so far is we have just 12 years to reach 2030. But I listening to President Bio this morning, one of the things I realized was there is a silent P we may have to activate in order to reach the SDGs in 2030. And that is what I call the political will. So we have the 5 Ps already, but this P is a special silent P, which I believe when influencers and global keepers, that is goalkeepers like ourselves, begin to re-echo that into the political space, definitely we'll be able to achieve more. Because when you realize President Bio was just a man on a mission, listening to what he mentioned and said this morning, and that is the political will and commitment we need to make sure we achieve the goals in the next 12 years. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you very much.
We actually have time for one more. Should we take it over to this side?
She's waving.
All right. We're waving. I'm sorry. Oh, someone's got a mic. We'll try to come to you if we have a second.
I'll be really quick so that you have a minute.
Great, love it.
I'm Lakshmi from Girls Not Brides, to the global civil society partnership focused on ending child marriage. And just going back to that question about funding and capacity building, I want to take us back to this morning to the accelerator that was announced that's focused on getting funding to grassroots organizations. The thing that I find most exciting about that concept is, of course, it's the amount of money that's in there, but it's really the attitude of the donors who are coming together. It's about spending the first year working with civil society organizations, giving them grants, but learning through that process of what are the practical barriers that they're facing to access this funding, helping them do the proposal writing, adapting the application process so that it really makes sense for the people who are doing the work, and really taking this learning agenda on, like, embracing it and recognizing that we have to all learn together for these amazing grassroots activists and organizations to do the work that they do best, especially if they're girl-led, if they're women-led, if they're youth-led. So if you're a donor, and if you think that this rings a bell and is something that you would want to be a part of, there's some amazing people here who want to work together to do this learning. And if you're a grantee of an organization that doesn't work that way, show them some of these groups that are actually proving that it is possible to get money to grassroots organizations and activists in a way that is empowering, that highlights the importance of their knowledge and their local context. And it's not, you can't hide behind this idea of like, oh, it's much too difficult and we can't make it happen. It can happen, it is happening, and that's what was recognized this morning.
Oh, that's
Thank
amazing.
you.
Very tangible.
Hi, everyone. I'll be very quick. I would have loved to see a lot more businesses here. I think one of the big questions is how do we get businesses to own the SDGs? I work on SDG 8, decent work and economic opportunity for all in a continent like Africa, and I think like most of the world, but I won't extrapolate, where the backbone of economy is really small businesses. So it's great to have the Unilevers here, but they're not creating the millions of jobs in my country, Nigeria. How do we get small and growing businesses to start to own the SDGs? I like what people talked about here, that you have to really give people an alternative. One is, how do you build a business case? Why should I care about the SDG? Why does it make sense for my business to provide decent work and economic opportunity for everyone? But then how do I do it? How do you create alternative tools to help small businesses level the playing field and provide decent work and opportunities for all? So those are some of the questions that I'd love help with. Anyone who likes to help make data simple and accessible for businesses, please come find me in the atrium.
I think I see a hand. I think you can go ahead and just directly respond.
Hi everybody, my name is Kat Tao. I live in Vietnam. I'm also one of the writers in the report. I think on the point of capacity building and, I think that we all have different structures and we all come from different countries. I come from a country with one party, right? And I think when we discuss when we talk about donors and aid, and there is a certain language and there's a certain structure that we're assuming, and international business, building alliances with international business. But I think we really need to not ignore all the possible innovative alliances within our own countries. So the private sector within our own countries, the role of philanthropy, and it might not be massive amounts of money, but I know that within my country, successful companies are not going to be asking for a 65-page like a document that is structured in a very Western-centric perspective. So I think there are a lot of opportunities within our own countries, and the role of businesses, successful businesses within our own countries, instead of just only going to, the big multinational companies. And I think if we have a very good business case for our domestic enterprises, they are willing to listen. My experience with Vietnamese successful companies is that they do want to give back. It's just about, telling them, sharing with them why it's actually important to them. And it's a massive untapped resource. So I think let's not ignore what we have in our own homes. Thank you.
You know what? There's actually so much great stuff coming out of this conversation. I know there were a few more who really wanted to say something. We'll just do a few more, shall we? Just because it's such a great conversation. Okay, we've got one here.
Thanks. My name's Mary Cray. I'm an MP in the UK Parliament for the Labour Party, and I just wanted to respond to the young woman over there who was asking about politics, and just to give you a few of my rules about how to achieve your goals, because everyone in this room is doing something that is profoundly political, but it's with a big P or a small p. We all want to see change and progress. So the first thing is don't stay silent in questions and answers. So that's your first promise to yourself, is that you are going to be the person that is going to be asking the question. The second thing, to the moderators, if you're ever in a moderating position, always call a woman first, because the research has shown that if you call men put up their hands. If you call a woman, women will feel empowered and encouraged to put up their hands, and that's been demonstrated through research. So that's something that whenever I'm moderating something, I will sit and wait for 5 minutes until somebody puts their hand up, and that's just a bit of feedback. Third thing is, a picture says 1,000 words. Politicians are great at talking, but one picture, those naughty bananas, that's going to stay with me. Yes. We did a 60-page report into soil, and it was great to hear the guy talking about soil this morning. You've got to stop treating it like dirt. And we had a picture of how the fenlands in the east of England all the soil had just blown away over the past 20 years. And we just stuck that picture into our report, because we could say that in 2 paragraphs. But if you show people where the soil used to be 20 years ago and where it is now, you physically demonstrate the problems that we're trying to face. We're in a visual society, and people can't take stuff in just listening to things. They have to be shown things as well, which is why I think today has been so brilliant. And finally, we're all the authors of our own lives, and you have your story to tell. We've heard some fantastic and amazing stories, and it's our responsibility, I think and I feel, to take the stories that we've heard here today and to take them back. I'll be taking them back with my colleagues who are here, with Preet and Rosanna, back to the UK Parliament, and we'll keep telling those stories even when some of the people in our parliaments at the moment don't want to listen. So thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, Now we do kind of have to wrap up, but I promise we really are going to have networking going on. A lot of people who you just heard speak will be right out there in the atrium. But that was fantastic. That was like SDG therapy. We were all talking to each other, and look, we did a pretty good job on a lot of these how-tos. But we are going to be right out there in a little bit, and a lot of you, thank you to our advisory group and everyone in this room who has made such a difference today.
Absolutely. And one of the wonderful speakers you'll be able to speak to in the atrium later is Edna Adan. Now, we were lucky enough to get to meet her yesterday, and she completely blew us away. Here are just some of the amazing things this woman has done. She was the first Somali woman to drive. She's been foreign minister in her homeland. She's built her own hospital, and now, as well as running that, she's actually running her own university. She's really bringing to life that theme of today, investing in young people and hypercharging action. It's fair to say that there's a lot that we can all learn from her. So to close this session, please join me in giving a very big welcome to the stage, Edna Adan.
Hello, everyone. What a day we've had. I know I've had the best day of my life. The energy in this hall and the wisdom that was coming out of the people today was so amazing. And I say, thank God I lived to be 81, to live this. Imagine if I had died at 80, I wouldn't have had this. And the wonderful encouragement and the commitments that I've heard. The commitments from President Macron. Environment. Where would we be without environment? Education. You wouldn't be here without education. You'd still be carving things on a stone. Health. Where would we be without health? We're here because we're healthy, because we can think, because it gives us opportunity to use our bodies, our minds, our skills, our time. But how many people have that in the world? We heard about the commitment of Sierra Leone, technology. We heard about the plight of refugees. And that hurts a lot, because I come from Somaliland, the poorest country in the world, one that doesn't even feature on your maps. We don't have a flag out there. We don't exist. But we have over 17 or 18,000 refugees in Somaliland who we host, who we protect, who we feed, who we educate, who we treat. And we don't treat just a simple cold or a diarrhea. Children in the Horn of Africa, whether in Somalia or Somaliland, Djibouti, and parts of Ethiopia, who are born with hydrocephaly, water on the brain. Do you know where they go for treatment? They don't have a passport. They don't have visas. They can't go anywhere else. Do you know where they go for treatment? Where their parents bring them? They bring them to Somaliland. To Somaliland? To put a shunt in the brain? In Somaliland? Now, where are the neurosurgeons in Somaliland who can do that? Who are willing to go to Somaliland to go and operate on children? Operated on by a young woman who herself was a refugee, who taught herself to read on sand. Do you say, why could she not learn on a what do you call it, the tablet, or paper or pencil? She didn't have that. She learned to teach herself to read on sand, as you do on the beach. You do designs. That's how our children learn taught themselves to read. That child in a refugee camp, sitting in the shade of a tree because there were no schools, was one of the first 306 young girls who applied to my nursing school in 2000. And we interviewed them, and we had them sit for entrance exams in maths and biology and chemistry. These are subjects I need that candidate to know and to have learned if I'm going to train them to become nurses tomorrow and calculate doses and treatments. And when we had 42 who passed the exams, the top 40, I had them sit there, and there was a little girl on the third row, and I said, by the way, what's that girl doing in the third row, the little one, the one between the girl in the green dress? And they said, oh, she's one of the 42 who passed the exams. And I said, but she's a kid, she's a baby. My goodness, she's going to take space that could have been used by an older person. Anyway, she held on to her position. She excelled in her studies. She grew taller, almost by the minute. She's taller than I am now, which isn't hard because I'm only 5'1½". But she grew, and she retained her position. She passed the midwifery exam, and she was so good, I sponsored her medical education. And she graduated as a medical doctor in 2011, and she was trained by a neurosurgeon who came to us from North Carolina every 6 weeks to train her. That young girl, who I almost kicked out, who was too small, too young to become a nurse, is today a neurosurgeon who has operated on over 500 children. So, that teaches you, I hope that gives you that message, that your potential is limitless. What I would like you to take away today is that you should have that confidence in yourself, that determination to want to do what you believe in and what you wish to do. And don't forget that if achievements like the ones that I've given you, that example, can happen in Somaliland, the sky's the limit. But first, do your homework. When you wish to do something, plan, study, analyze. Pick up your best options. What resources do you have? What is the size of the problem? How are you going to approach that problem? Study, analyze, look at your options. Find allies. Never go into a battle on your own if you can have allies who are like-minded. And I feel today that I have been given the most difficult task to summarize what had been said today. It's like putting a great ship into a little matchbox. But I feel that you're the future of this planet. I feel that you can do so much. If I could put that clock back 70 or 80 years, I would have never have imagined that one day there would be a fax, a telex, a computer. We didn't even know what it was like. But you have the tools, you have the technology, you have the capacity to do so much better in this world. So much energy is spent on destroying this poor planet of ours. Let us devote more time on building it. And let us devote more time on education, because that is the cement, those building blocks of development. Education is what makes us become and do what we can and what we can do in the future and do in the present. Now, for instance, today, my biggest ambition, I still have ambitions, by the way. I haven't given those up. My ambition today is, before I get called to other functions elsewhere, to train some school teachers for Somaliland, because that is that cloud that will help me train, educate more children. So education, the training of teachers, that's the mission I want to achieve before I get called away. Nurses can take care of themselves. They don't need me anymore. Nurses have a status. I'm not worried about midwives. By the way, I had a goal to train 1,000 midwives for Somaliland. But yesterday, I was told that we have reached the target of 938, and 600 are in training in different schools. So I have not only reached it, but I have done 150%. So if that can be done in Somaliland, it can be done everywhere. Women must be saved. Women can be saved with training, with education, with determination. And thank you all so very much. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak about the potential of human beings. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to the iconic Edna Adan for such a positive and really powerful way to take us towards the end of what's been a truly magnificent day.
And to bring us to a fitting close, we'd like to reflect on today's many highlights with someone who inspired the entire Goalkeepers movement.
Ladies and gentlemen, for the final time today, please welcome back Melinda Gates.
Thank you so much for joining us up here.
Well, what a great day it's been.
I can't even believe it. It's been incredible.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, it's been an amazing 24 hours really since yesterday, but what are the moments that have really stood out for you?
Well, I think last night, starting with the award winners, to see what they could do in their communities, whether that was Dismas or Nadia, they remind us why we're here and what these goals are about. And then today, to see some of the change agents, Edna, DJ Switch this morning, who inspired all of us, President Macron, who stepped into this leadership role in just such a powerful way. It was, I would say, these 24 hours has been even more than we could have imagined for.
And at the end of today specifically, what do you want these goalkeepers to take home? What's your parting message for them?
Well, I want them to take home that this is going to take more than just what happened in the room today, and it's your energy and your inspiration that are going to move these goals forward. Progress is possible, but it's not at all inevitable. And we, the older generation, learn and are inspired by you. We're here behind you, but we're incredibly excited to see the extraordinary things and the work that you will do ahead.
Thank you so much.
Melinda, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's actually it. Goalkeepers 2018 is over, or at least it is in here. But out there in the atrium, we'd love you to keep talking, keep connecting, and start that process of making change happen.
And to keep the energy up, we're going to end this day with a track very special to all of us, to everyone, by the late great Aretha Franklin, Respect. And there's only one person who we could have invited back to push the button on that, right? DJ Switch Ghana is back, everyone.